someone or other, or some way or other. And I'm really happy that you're all here, because I think that the best way to see this movie is with an audience of any size. Because if you watch it at home, you feel like a sick weirdo because you're laughing and you're not sure that you should be. So I'm really happy that you all came here. I'm so happy to show the movie in New York, especially at this fine institution where I saw like Harold and Maude and Where's Papa in 1982 on a double feature my parents did. So this place
that's when
was
it was
for me.
one theater.
Correct.
One,
Yeah.
like one screen.
Yeah, there was a rep theater for a long time. So
Big house.
Anyway.
Anyway, let's start with the ending. Like we were just standing out there, you know, when the baby's crying that the movie's over. How about that last shot? And it's standing there holding that kid, all bloody, crying. The kid's crying. How did you get that kid to cry?
I don't know if you know children, Kevin, but
I know a few.
Yeah, you know a few that you know of. We actually shot the movie mostly in sequence, so everything in the house was shot in sequence, but the actual beginning and ending of the film was shot at the beginning. So in terms of
you just met the kid.
Yeah, he's a friend. He's the son of a friend of the director, Evan Katz, and he was a little boy, and we had a great day together where we shot the beginning of the movie, and then we shot the end of the movie. And you know, there's no real way to prepare a little kid for a monster that enters a dark room that you're in, which I had thought in my mind that it was somehow going to be shot so that we wouldn't spook him, that maybe the shots would be done separately. I didn't really understand the concept of this final wide shot, which is quite breathtaking, but you know, any way you take it. I really felt awful about it, so we didn't do it a lot. At one point, you can see he touches a particular spot that's wet on me, and he really freaks out, and I think in the take we didn't use, I feel terrible talking about this, but
Let's talk about...
he reaches for the doorknob, the door that he's trying to escape. He's fine now, his name is Eli. His father sends me a picture or a video saying hi to me like almost every week because he knows how bad I felt and everything. They're really proud of him. And he looks like he would be my kid, so it's good.
Yeah, it's good casting. I love when he's like trying to take your glasses off.
Yeah.
At the beginning of it.
You can't, you know, you can't prepare for any of that kind of thing. So we were just sort of in there, and we have a scene. There's a few lines that we got to get to, but I just started taking my glasses off and watching the screen, and the cartoon was on the screen, and all that kind of stuff is, you know, it's interesting because, like, you know, like acting, like when you're at your best is like if you get back to that state when you're really young, you just pretend it all the time and believe. So kids are natural actors, you know, sometimes force them to be sort of precocious or whatever, but it's nothing more natural than a 18-month-old and 2-year-old who has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, he'll be in film school.
And I had somebody say, yeah, exactly. I had somebody say to me that they could title that last shot "Fatherhood" as if it were a weird like Norman Rockwell, like on, you know, fucked up Norman Rockwell painting. You know what I mean? It almost has that kind of like frame iconography to it. But yeah, it was. I had never seen it. I knew what the makeup looked like, which was spectacular, obviously. And what was cool about the way we shot the movie is I knew what I looked like at the beginning and what I looked like at the end. So I knew where I had to get to in terms of performance, but it was, I had no idea until I saw it the first time with the audience, packed audience down in Austin. It was like this amazing thing that kind of took everybody's breath away. So
yeah, it's very visceral, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of the films you do have that kind of visceral quality, you know, like Lions had that. I you know, wanted you to repeat that anecdote from last night, and then maybe take some questions if anyone has any questions. But just before we get to you, sir, this story, remarkable, about the scene with the finger and when you scream.
oh yeah, I came in here just to hear you guys during that part. I love it. So we shot the scene where we're actually at the chopping block there. That was like a whole day. So we shot it from so many different angles because it was cut in a way to make it very tense. And then the next day was the aftermath. When I stand up, there's a delayed reaction, and then I have screaming. I hurt myself. I just said, I don't know what's going to come out of me. I don't know what it's going to be. I had prepared, a lot. I did a lot of work at home. I knew what needed to happen. I don't believe in sort of indicating to you, the audience, that I'm in pain. I believe in really trying to show you what realistically that would look like, as compared to like something like The Hangover, which we love and enjoy. Those guys get to go home and everything's fine at the end of the movie, but we wanted to do something where the consequences are real. So I just said, run with me. We had 2 cameras, 2 handheld cameras. And this blood-curdling sound came out of me. I ran around, and then we got to the couch, and we did this, scene with, again, 2 cameras covering the aftermath of that, the emotional devastation, the iron, branding it, ripping his little tad, ripping off the iron, the branding. A lot of prop work, a lot of art department, the steam, fake steam coming out of the iron, the prosthetics, blood pump. And on top of that, this performance where I'm like, I'm summoning up, a lifetime of pain and anguish, like everything I can. I'm not even conscious of what's happening. It's just coming out of me like a waterfall, right? And we do the whole scene and everything, and so you cut, and everyone applauds because, not just because the performance was good. I'm proud of what I did, but that camera operator said that was the best operating I've ever done. The art department, had to get all this stuff done. We have no time in this movie. We shot in 14 days. We had no time. Almost everything was one take, including that, which is important to the story because I felt so. I was in so much pain, but I felt so much catharsis from doing that. It's like my life is better because I did that scene. Like I got so much out of myself that. It's magic of acting. I wrote a blog about it. You can look it up. It's Acting and Exhilaration, PAT HEALY. I wrote about what magical. It was like an experience I'd waited for my whole life. And 2 days later, when we were shooting, and I had the prosthetics on, the director and the producer came to me and told me that someone accidentally erased it. This is what happens like with digital. There was a chip, and I think actually it was one of those things where somebody said, got gold here, I'm going to hold on to this, and then like put it somewhere, and it got taped over, and I was devastated.
Unbelievable.
So we had to go. A couple days later, I wouldn't talk to the producer or director. They conveniently told me when I had my prosthetics on, so they couldn't really freak out because it would all fall off and everything. And I just sort of went the whole day with just sort of, doing my job and not really speaking to them. And then I said, okay, it's the long days. If anyone wants to stay at the end of the day, we have to shoot it again. I'll do it again, and anyone who wants to go home can, but it's my great pleasure and testament to how great the crew was and everything, that they all stayed, and we did it again 3 more times, and what I learned was this tap, had been open in me that I didn't know I could access, but I trusted myself, and everyone trusted me to be able to do it, and you think, you're just going to have that moment. There's a famous story about Laurence Olivier where he's doing like Richard III, and he does this amazing thing, and everyone off stage is watching him, and everyone in the audience is just like rapping, it's a standing ovation, and he walks off, and he's pissed, and he slams his door, and one of the other actors comes in and says, hey Larry, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen, what's wrong? And he said, I don't know how I did it. He didn't know how I could ever get that again. That I felt like, I'm not trying to say I'm better than Laurence Olivier.
You are. Okay. But get that.
Something opened to me that I feel like I can always access now that I wasn't aware was there before.
What's funny to me is that we're talking about a scene, a take rather, that we didn't watch tonight.
Right. You see some of it because the B camera sort of gets the first part of the action, which is like the original sort of like ripping off the finger and the iron and stuff like that, and you can see it's kind of out of focus and stuff because it's a second camera, but the actual footage of me, my reactions is
it's kind of, there's like an alternate take to of Jimmy Page's guitar solo in Stairway to Heaven. What? There's another, he did another
again.
solo? So, this is just as good as the other thing.
So Jimmy Page, Olivier.
Fucking Pat what I'm saying.
Good night.
You had a question.
Vince? No, I think, look, I think what's interesting about the movie is it's moral.
Over to you, Pat.
There's some moral ambiguity there. I mean, you know, you could say that one guy is, you know, a good guy who's trying to provide for his family, and the other guy is self-serving. And so maybe he is deserving of that. I mean, certainly maybe he deserves to be murdered, but, you know, maybe you think so, but that's okay. And it's just a movie, so you don't have to ever feel bad about it. There's another part of it that is the guy that you think is the morally centered person really, and when it comes down to it, which is when it really matters, when morality really matters, does a really awful thing. And the other guy has a moral center. He doesn't. He could kill me, but he doesn't, because he doesn't feel right about it. So even the last shot, some people find that really entertaining. I was just saying last night, in South Korea, we showed this movie, and they think I'm a superhero. They think this is like a superhero origin story. They look at that ending as like a man, a good father pushed to the edge, who triumphs over incredible odds to become this masculine, you know, sort of figure. And it's certainly sort of framed playfully that way, but you know, I don't, again, like we talk about like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver as being, his actions at the end of the film are interpreted as being heroic, and many people saw that movie and felt that way because Death Wish had been a big hit, the vigilante, and he certainly, it appears to be on the surface that he does things for morally good reasons, but he doesn't. We know he does it because he's crazy, but he does some good things, so does that make him any less heroic? I don't know, but I don't think you're a bad person. If that answers your question, and I'm fascinated. We get all kinds of interpretations of this movie. I just read something yesterday that said that I was a recovering alcoholic, and it's a whole story about...
That your character was a recovering alcoholic?
Yeah, and it's all about how I fall off the wagon and stuff, but there's no indication of that. I mean, I call my wife and tell her I'm going for a drink. It's not as if...
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it.
Yeah, I know, but I thought that was interesting too. I mean, people find all kinds of things, and I like ambiguity. I like that there's just enough about the characters there to give you a history, you know, of what's going on, but there's a lot of room for interpretation, especially about who Colin and Violet are and what they're all about too. His pupils dilate, yeah. The coke kind of wears off for a second, and then he realizes he doesn't want to do it. And if you talk to Ethan, he'll say, you know, he's a father, Ethan, in real life, and I'm not. And he'll say he always thought about this guy as a child, so I can't do this. You know? But if you think he's a scumbag, hey, you know, and he deserves to die, that's okay. You know, we all, it's a movie, so it's just a movie, regardless of how you all thought. Oh, yes, sir.
This movie came out first recession, and how this kind of feasibility was. And when I saw the movie, it seemed to be this social commentary where it was more people do whatever the fuck they want. Is that right in there at all? Or is that...
I think it's inherent in the writing, yeah, that you know, it's certainly about that. You can't avoid that in this day and age. It's not something we talked about in doing the scenes or anything like that, but we certainly were all aware of that. Like, for example, you can't play, as an actor, you can't play the recession, you know what I mean? Like, but I can play, I'm broke, I don't know what to do, you know, I think what's really interesting about it is it's the two rich people making the two poor people do that to each other. They're making us angry at each other, you know? That's very, like, analogous to what's going on in the country and in the world right now. So I think it's really interesting. I think the movie can be enjoyed without that, but I think it would be hard for anyone in America right now to look at the movie and not see that. But at the same time, we want to make something that's not a, you know, what's the word, pedantic, you know, that's sort of like it's not a, you know, a lesson, you know, it's not like a, you know, a message movie, you know, necessarily. It's graphic entertainment, and you know, some of the best movies of these genres are movies that have, you know, great social underpinnings to them.
It reminded me of Trading Places.
Yeah, it has a lot of that in it.
With the two old guys, the two rich old guys, they have their thing is,
They want to take Dan Aykroyd, who's a successful Wall Street guy.
yeah, one guy wants to
investor.
prove that the reason Dan Aykroyd's character is successful is breeding. And the
Right.
other one's
Nature versus nurture.
Right.
Eddie Murphy, who's a homeless bum, and they trade places.
Yeah, and then
And the bet is for $1.
for
yeah.
$1 at the end of the movie. You find out they just were wagering $1.
Yeah. And this it's $50, which is lower than the first bet. At $50 is what I find in the toilet at the beginning, so that's how much it ultimately really matters.
Were you in on the writing of this screenplay at all, or did it come to you as we see it?
No, there was a script by a guy named Trent Haga, and that was written many years ago, and I think he was a young father too who was struggling, and he wrote this script called Money for Something, which the director Evan Katz saw and through a series of things wanted to make, and then he brought on this other actor, a writer named David Churchirillo, who did like a rewrite. Hey, you friends at churches? Okay. Are you guys from Chicago? All right, right on. I'm from Chicago. But and they developed it together, and then the script I got was, you know, that was like a, you know, incredibly read by the director, but was basically what you see, and really not a lot of time to improvise or anything like that. There are things that. There are lines of dialogue that are, you know, embellished and things like that, but there's nothing in it that we came up, and it was such a, like, tight story, and everything had to work that way that you couldn't really, like, deviate too much from it. And the biggest thing, as I talked about before, was David Koechner was really concerned that there wasn't enough time to realistically cook a dog. And so we had these, like, crazy, that's how crazy we were. It was 105 degrees outside, we had no air conditioning, we had rolling blackouts, we lost power for half a day, all this stuff. What's that? Yeah, well, it's cotton balls. It's just rotisserie chicken with cotton balls on it. But so we had a discussion about that, and we actually shot some alternate stuff where I fall asleep and wake up again. But ultimately, the scene that I did with Ethan right after I get my finger chopped off, where we, you know, go over our lives together, ended up feeling really full and feels longer. And then David added this, he improvised this thing. He didn't really, he looked up what would cook a dog, and it was 156 degrees or whatever it is, and then he says he has a meat thermometer. So nobody seems to have a problem with it, because it's like, if you have a problem with that, you have a problem with something else about it. You know, it's like, if you can buy into that's happening, you're not really worried about how long it took or what the temperature was. But yeah, not a lot, just not a lot of time. I mean, we almost, you know, we certainly didn't rehearse ahead of time. We did one reading without Koechner because he wasn't available. And then, like, usually you rehearse the scene on the set just to block it out, but oftentimes we didn't have time to do that. We would just shoot the rehearsal, so a lot of the movies just 1 or 2 takes of everything.
Did you have a stunt coordinator?
Yeah, we did. We had an amazing
Or
guy.
a fight coordinator?
Yeah, this guy George Wilbur, who is a huge man, who began his career as John Wayne's stunt double on El Dorado with Howard Hawks, John Wayne and Robert Mitchum. And if you go on George Wilbur's IMDb, it's like every single movie you've ever seen. Like, he was Michael Myers in a couple of those Halloween movies, and, like, you know, every movie, and you'd be like, what did you do in Lethal Weapon? He's like, I was the guy that, like, took 12 shots from Mel Gibson. You know, he's done a million things. So he was there. He happens to be the father-in-law of one of the producers, and he did, like, amazing stuff with us, but we were often so hurried that we sometimes would not do the choreography correctly. And I gave Ethan a black eye. He hurt me a bunch of times, you know, and slamming me around. He's strong, bruiser.
And you guys, there was some tension between you guys.
Yeah, we didn't get along during the movie at all. We actually didn't get along at all. And we didn't speak until 6 months after we wrapped. I called him after the South by Southwest premiere a year ago and told him that the movie was great, it'd be great in it. And then slowly over the next 6 months, we actually built a friendship where we both kind of, you know, realized we would be sort of too deep into it. There's really no way to. I'm not like a big method guy, but there's no way to do something like this without.
Which brings me to the one question I want to ask. Like, as an actor myself, I know you're saying it was like 100 degrees when you were making this, or more than that, you know, and like, I always find like this movie is fucked. You know, if I'm working on a movie and it's like 110 degrees out, I can't concentrate. I'm like, it's over.
There's another part of you.
I don't feel like working anymore.
Right.
So what I want to know is like, what is it about this part that made you give 100% every day under the pressure of the weather and the low budget circumstances?
Well, I just think first of all, the best part I've ever been offered in my life was a chance to do anything I've ever wanted to do in an entire career, much less in one movie. Really was the character from beginning to end, the real arc, the most subtle sort of interior stuff, and the most grandiose, you know, sort of dramatic stuff, and everything. You know. It was tough. I mean, I really had done a lot of work on it, and I lived with it for a long time, so I knew I really had to do it. And I knew that this movie could be, there's a version of this movie that could be silly if we played it a certain way, if we did a kind of shtick, you know, or if David Koechner did his usual shtick that he does in comedies, but none of us wanted to do that, and the director didn't want to do that. It was like, what is this movie that is real, that is played for real, where the consequences are real? So what drove me every day was just that I wanted to do it so badly, and that it was working. Because we were shooting in sequence, I felt the performance building, I felt myself evolving as a person. You know, like we talked about that finger getting chopped off scene. I grew as a human being, as a person, because I did that. You know, and that's so rewarding, and you just want to keep going. And you realize at the end of the day, like, all that other stuff is sort of ephemeral, meaningless.
I love how you just exhausted yourself in that. Like, you were, by the end of the scream, you were, you know, like, clearly out of breath.
I was out of breath, and actually a laugh, the strangest thing will happen if you do that. You'll start laughing. I have no idea why. I didn't really realize it until I watched it. But once I wore out all the anger and all the pain and the sadness, I started laughing. So I guess you just kind of run through the sort of cycle of emotions or whatever it is. I don't know.
Now, do you think that you and Ethan would be friends now if the movie wasn't successful?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, we're not pretending to be friends because the movie's doing well. You know, we're really like. I think we realized that we're a lot more alike each other than we cared to admit at the time. I think that was it. There was a lot of competition. He also wanted to play my part, I think, initially. You know, everybody wanted this part. They almost didn't give it to me. They were going to give me Koechner's part because they wanted, you know, a name or something. And then Evan, the director, really fought for me. So like there was competition, and you know, there's always personal stuff which I'm not going to get into, but that was going on in both of our lives. That colors everything you do. Like you were saying, we were talking about it before. There's sometimes that movie or that role that comes along right at that time. And like when I did Compliance, I was about to go through a horrible divorce. And I felt awful every day I went to work, but it served that movie. And that's why, you know, for me, at least my part of that movie, like, was fueled by that. I don't welcome that. I'm not looking for trouble so that I can give a good, intense performance, but sometimes it happens. And in this case, it just was kind of like, whatever, I'm at this point in my life where this seemed like the exact right role at this time. So I would also say to anyone who's interested in acting or whatever, you know, if you're struggling and you just keep hanging in there, well, eventually something gives and comes around for you like that. So.
Yeah. Any other questions? You got one?
I saw Compliance.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I saw the movie Compliance. Were you the phone operator?
Correct, yes.
Okay, yes, I remember that. That was it.
Yeah. It was much worse than that. Well, maybe. I don't actually murder anyone in that, but I found that character much more reprehensible because this is a guy who's like not true to himself, and like, but he finally becomes true to himself. It's horrible how he becomes true to himself, but like,
You know, another movie that this reminded me of was Nighthawks.
I haven't seen that in a long time with Sylvester Stallone.
Yes, and I think the English actor who plays the head of the agency, you know, that they're after the killer.
Yeah, Rutger Hauer.
Rutger Hauer. And you know, Stallone's character has this whole moral dilemma about capturing the guy and killing him. And Davenport says, you have the killer instinct. Everybody has it. It's just a matter of pushing the right buttons, you know, or the right circumstances. So I thought of that while watching the movie.
Well, I think of cartoon analogies a lot because I grew up with cartoons and I watched them well late into my adulthood, and maybe they're not the most sophisticated, but they've been good tools, and one of them is the Homer Simpson in quicksand. I'm going to pull my feet out with my hands, and now I'll pull my hands out with my face analogy, which is like you're in this situation. It makes sense at the time to do whatever you got to do because you're fucked, you know, and so like, might as well give it a shot, even though it's going to swallow you whole. And then the other thing about this character is like there's like an image in my mind that informs things somehow of the character in like Popeye, or maybe like a Three Stooges where they like punch him like a million times and he's still standing, and then like the person goes, Popeye's, and he falls over. It's like this is a guy who has been punched a lot, and then literally gets punched a lot, and like is just one breath away from completely collapsing. So that's sort of those kinds of ideas.
It's kind of like the character who gets like hit on the head with a frying pan,
Yeah.
and then his head turns the shape of the frying pan,
Right.
and then he just goes boing,
Yeah.
and then it goes back to normal.
It's like that, except
Except
it doesn't go back to normal. Does anybody else have any questions? I know we probably gotta open it up for the next show, but they're lined up around the block, I swear. Well, thanks again for coming. And like I said, this is a small movie, so we don't have a lot of advertising dollars and stuff. So like, if you liked it, we've had a lot of success with Twitter, with Facebook, with all this stuff, because people are saying they like it, and people have never heard of it, don't even know it's out, and they're finding out about it that way. If you can't get to the theater, if someone can't get to the theater, it's available like on VOD, it's on iTunes, it's on all that stuff. So thank you so much for coming, and I really think you saw it the best way. But for all your friends, if you want people to see it, that would be great if you let them know, and I really appreciate y'all coming out here. And I want to say thank you.
real true yours.
Thank you.
Right on.